Welcome. I would just like to invite all of our panelists to the front. Ms. Dianna Barrowclough, Giuseppe de Simone, and we are also joined by Mr. Bentley, Allan, and a huge welcome to Her Excellency Minister Maropene Ramokgopa from the Department of Monitoring, Evaluation and Development. Welcome everyone. My name is Kamal Ramburuth from the Institute for Economic Justice. The Institute for Economic Justice is a progressive economic think tank based in Johannesburg. And this year we've been a resource partner to the G20 and the Sherpa track in particular. One of the exciting tasks that we've had this year is to support the work of Task Force 1, which is a task force that focuses on employment, inclusive growth, reducing inequalities, and industrialization. And one of the tasks of the Task Force 1 is to discuss the issue of industrial policy. And it had originally been framed as developing G20 principles on green industrial policy, and has now become the negotiations on the G20 principles on sustainable industrial policy, to incorporate the various elements of economic, social, and environmental development. These negotiations are currently ongoing within the task force. There have been many days of sittings of negotiations on these principles. And this kind of discussion that we're going to have today is to discuss some of the developments around those negotiations, but more broadly to discuss the development of industrial policy. Industrial policy was a swear word a decade or two ago, but has now become a buzzword. The shift in the global order away from what's known as the Washington Consensus, which was underpinned an approach to economic global policy around deregulation and a complete absence of any market making or market interference, has now been entirely upended by some of the largest economies of the world. But even within that context, in the context of the US using industrial policy, in the context of China using industrial policy, in the context of Europe using industrial policy, there was still an absence of an honest discussion about the fact that, yes, we are all using industrial policy, and yet the narrative around discouraging others to do the same thing continued. And so the very act of the South African government to put industrial policy on the table is an act of seeking some kind of honesty about what's going on in the world, and seeking to develop common principles amongst the largest economies in the world in pursuit of win-wins within the global system. So on that note, I would like to give you all a huge welcome and a huge thank you to the Bloomberg Center of Johns Hopkins University, our partners of Johns Hopkins and the South Center. It's a real honor to be here in this beautiful, beautiful building. It really is stunning, and it's very exciting to having this exciting discussion in such an incredible location. We'll start off the proceedings today with an input by Her Excellency Maropene Ramokgopa, and then we will move on to a panel-style discussion with Dr. Dianna Barrowclough, Dr. Giuseppe de Simone, and Dr. Bentley, Allan. So on that note, I would like to welcome up to the stage Her Excellency Minister Ramokgopa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kamal, and good morning to everyone. Let me greet, of course, the panelists, ladies and gentlemen, friends of South Africa, and I would say lovers of industrial policy. South Africa, of course, is, I think is 35%, almost 35% of industrialization in the entire region of Africa is in South Africa. But we have also realized, of course, that without regional integration, we will then now not be able to achieve some of the things that we have set out for ourselves. We can have as many policies that we have, but if there is no regional integration, we will then now not be able to achieve some of those things that we set out for ourselves. We have recently, I would always say that it's recently, I think it is last year, we have then now been able to come up with something that is called the Medium-Term Development Plan after having to actually come up with a coalition of 10 political parties in South Africa, which is like the first time we had to actually go through that. We then now agreed that an inclusive economy cannot be done without having to look at industrialization, and that would then now assist us to actually be able to come up with job creation. So it is important for us to then now be able to start having talks, but also to learn and actually increase the knowledge base that is needed for us to be able to achieve what we have set out for ourselves as a country, but also as part of the region of SADC, but also the region of Africa as a whole. Of course, it is an honor to open this important dialogue on industrial policy cooperation under the banner of South Africa's G20 presidency. I would like to extend my appreciation, of course, to Johns Hopkins University and the Net Zero Industrial Policy Lab for hosting us today. I would like to extend a special thank you to our G20 resource partners, the Institute of Economic Justice, the South Center, and the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development for their ongoing support for convening this vital discussion today at such a critical conjuncture for global economic governance. Across the world, international organizations such as the International Monetary Fund and World Bank and countries in the global north and global south are rethinking the role of industrial policy. Industrial policy is being redefined not only as a tool for growth and competitiveness, but also as an instrument to inclusion, sustainability, and definitely resilience. Collectively, we are called to envision and put into practice policies that will grow our economies while we are also delivering justice, equality, and definitely opportunities. In this regard, it is important for industrial policy to be financed in ways that are market enhancing, while simultaneously reducing inequality and poverty and creating employment. This must be done because it is both smart economic planning and moral prerogative. This is why the G20 Task Force 1 that Kamal have just been speaking about is negotiating G20 High-Level Principles and green industrial policy, as well as South Africa's leadership. South Africa's G20 presidency is guided by the overarching theme of solidarity, equality, as well as sustainability. South Africa's G20 presidency emphasizes that moral purpose and economic rationality can and must go hand in hand. A fair and efficient global economy cannot be achieved if growth is decoupled from equality or equity, or if innovation is pursued without inclusion. We do believe in inclusivity in whatever it is that we do. An economy that leaves millions behind is not truly efficient, and a financial system that rewards speculation over sustainable production will not take us closer to achieving a sustainable development goals agenda. Our challenge, therefore, is to align industrial ambition with social justice, to build markets that create value and opportunity broadly, and to finance industrial institutions in ways that empower rather than include or exclude. That is why, under South Africa's presidency of the G20, we have also advanced the work of G20's Development Working Group on domestic resource mobilization and to decisively curb illicit financial flows. In July this year, the G20 Ministerial Meeting of Development adopted the G20's Kukuza Development Ministerial Declaration, which recognizes that curbing illicit financial flows is essential to unlocking the fiscal space needed for sustainable development and definitely industrial transformation. According to UNCTAD, the African continent loses an estimated $88.6 billion each year to illicit financial flows. That is an equivalent of 3.7% of the African or the whole of the continent's GDP. Every dollar that is lost to illicit financial flow is harmful to tax competition, and also, it is definitely going to stop us from being able to achieve some of the agendas that we set out for ourselves. Some of those agendas, of course, will be in the industrial development, infrastructure development, innovation, and definitely job creation. In South Africa, we've recently just introduced reforms that are supposed to assist us with logistics network. And we're doing that precisely because we do understand that without a strong network in terms of logistics, we will not be able to industrialize at the pace that we would like to actually do it. As we rethink industrial policy, we should be deliberate about leaving no one behind in building a better and inclusive world. Therefore, it is crucial that industrial policies mainstream women, of course, as well as youth, persons with disabilities, and create an enabling environment for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. The outcome of the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development centers industrialization as a crucial driver for development and encouraged us to do the following. First of all, it encouraged us to strengthen the trade capacities of developing countries and their abilities to integrate into regional and global value chains. It also encouraged us to support demand-driven technical assistance to promote sustainable and inclusive industrialization. It also encourage us to strengthen trade finance mechanism, advance blended finance initiatives, and promote multi-stakeholder partnerships. As South Africa, we have already started doing that. We have come up with policies that would then now be able to allow us to have a stronger private sector participation in the assets that we have as a country. We can achieve this, of course, as we unlock further resources for finance development and green industrialization by ensuring that we enhance global financial transparency, promote data integrity and exchanges, address tax evasion and tax crime, enhance multilateral cooperation, particularly through customs and trade oversight. We can also be able to do that by implementing accountability mechanism. Wherever we went, we have been told that most of the institutions that are dealing with development or funding or even financing would always have a challenge as it relates to accountability mechanisms, most especially in developing countries, in particular the African continent. It also encourages us to strengthen state capacity and promote efficiency and effective practices, and also facilitate asset recovery. That is quite important. It is also crucial to recognize that policies need to be aligned with skills development and in inclusive growth. But to be successful, they require people with necessary skill sets. Industrial and green jobs often require technical expertise that most countries, especially developing countries and low-income countries, don't necessarily have. We need to ensure that our education systems, especially in Global South, can deliver people with these particular skills. I was just having a meeting yesterday with the World Bank, and we discussed the issue of why is it that there is a high rate of unemployment in South Africa, and 45% of the unemployed young people are actually young people that actually went to school. They are graduates. Why is that? It is for this reason that the issue of the skill sets that are necessary is actually also highlighted, because people can just go get educated, but if whatever it is that they're bringing on board does not speak to the economy itself and the policies that are trying to actually build a certain agenda, we will then now not be able to move forward. Distinguished delegates, it is possible to lay the foundation for financing industrial policy in ways that are equitable, transparent, growth-enhancing, and protect the planet. These efforts complete our broader mission to ensure that developing countries can industrialize on their own terms with value addition at sources and technological upgrading and decent work creation. I will give an example about what we are trying to do in South Africa. The just energy transition, everybody's talking about it, we're excited about it, we're having partners both from the north, the global north and global south. However, the challenge that remains is that if we don't also invest in the just part of it, we will then now leave other people behind. So it becomes important that inclusivity in whatever systems that we put in place or policies that are being suggested as is actually encompassed. As I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, the discussion we begin today are not merely technical. They touch on fundamental questions about the future of global economy. We will allow industrial policy to become a source of conflict, or we will make it a foundation for cooperation. We need to make a decision as it relates to that ourselves. Will the green transition deepen divides, or can it be great equalizer of our time? It is another decision that we can take and we can work towards. Under the banner of solidarity, equality and sustainability, South Africa's G20 presidency believes that cooperation is not only possible, it is imperative, it is necessary as well. This is because solidarity in smart economies is also an equalizer. Equality is a condition of efficiency and sustainability and it is only the viable path to shared prosperity in the globe. And we are saying this precisely because, as I've already said, inclusivity means that there will be shared prosperity as much as there is also shared accountability and shared responsibility. I look forward to the insights and exchanges that will follow today, and to working together to ensure that industrial policy becomes a driver of inclusion and resilience. I thank you, but I think before I say that, I was just looking at Mzwanele. He's actually my supervisor. I'm writing a thesis with University of South Africa on transforming Transnet so that it can then be a network that actually works. I must just say, he must just go easy on me. I hope that seeing you here, he will actually go easy on me, because when I arrived here, he just said, whatever, when you're done, we need to study afterwards, because I need you to finish by next year and graduate. So thank you very much for calling us here and giving us this opportunity to come and just share our views. Thank you very much.
Okay, at this point, thank you so much, Minister Ramokgopa, and we're really honored to have you here with us today. At this point, I'd just like to invite our panelists up. Giuseppe, Dianna, Bentley, please join us on the panel. I'm going to be quite ruthless with time. So I just made sure that the minister is sitting in the audience now, so I don't get in trouble when I get back home. But I'm going to be quite ruthless with time, and I apologize in advance. But I think we've only got less than 40 minutes left of this discussion. And so I'd like to pass on to Mr. Bentley Allan. This discussion that's ongoing within the G20 around principles, right? This kind of multilateral negotiating process. It's complex, it's time intensive, and often it only really delivers outcomes that are of the lowest common denominator, right, in consensus-based negotiations. What are the other ways that countries can organize and build coalitions to achieve the industrialization objectives that are needed outside of these kind of text-based negotiating environments? And then just to follow up on that is to ask, from your view as an academic, what can academia do in supporting governments' efforts to support the industrial policy?
Thank you, Kamal, and thank you to the Minister for her excellent comments, and for all of you for joining us so early in the morning. But we're blessed with some beautiful sunshine from behind the Capitol to greet us on this beautiful day. First of all, I do think that we have to strive for consensus in certain areas. The liberal international order and the rules that it was built upon were really designed to favor an interlocking set of market-based principles. And those principles now have come apart. And we are in this new domain where we have to find a new way forward. And I do think that the work that South Africa is leading on the task force for generating a new set of industrial policy principles is absolutely essential work, and we do have to strive for consensus. And the good news is that many of the principles that are being articulated through that task force are ones that I think countries in the global north and the global south, even with the difficult politics in Washington and in other capitals in the G7 currently, it's a very difficult time politically, not just in the United States, but also in France and in Japan and in the UK. So it seems like it's the time in which we're not going to get consensus, we're not going to get cooperation. But I actually think the world needs us to be more focused than ever and more driven to achieve consensus on core principles, especially around industrial policy, than ever. And the reason why I'm still optimistic is because that it's just obvious that there are win-wins all over the map when we think critically about the investment that we can do, not only in the energy system, but also in industrialization in the global south. Countries in the global north need the materials and expertise and value addition that can happen in the global south, and countries in the global south will really benefit from the finance and the investment that can be provided to them from countries in the global north. But in the absence of that consensus and the achievement of new ideas around principles, there are nonetheless still great opportunities for countries to form what we really think of as sectoral clubs in these areas. We don't need to have full consensus on everything, but rather the countries who want to advance a different vision for steel and aluminum, let's say, can get together and talk about the rules and think about how they can create concrete initiatives towards building new forms of supply chains in each of these areas in specific areas, right? So we can think about that happening in steel and aluminum, in the battery supply chain, in the supply chain for new renewables technologies. We can think about sectoral clubs where smaller groups of countries can get together to work on financing and project development in a strategic way, rather than leaving that up to just the market. And when we have industrial policies aligning between countries, we call this in the lab joint industrial policy where countries try to align their domestic industrial policies through international means, that joint industrial policy can be pursued at the sectoral level, at the micro level, not just at the macro level of trying to achieve G20 principles. And to your second question, I think there's so many things that academia can do and that we can provide in this space. I do think academia has to change somewhat. I think we have to become more accessible and more open and more integrated into the work that's actually happening in the world. I think back to when I started my PhD, and Minister, I cannot imagine being in charge of a ministry and also writing a dissertation. I can't imagine making breakfast and writing a dissertation at the same time. A dissertation can be so consuming. But I applaud you for it, and I know that there will be wonderful dynamic surprises that emerge from the interaction of these two different works, because I see that dynamic interaction in my own lab, where about half of my staff are really devoted to engagement in real policy and half to academic work, and the exchange that then happens and the fruitfulness that then develops from that intimate relationship between the two is really dynamic and beneficial. So I do think that we need to create more spaces like that in academia, where we're really bringing our expertise into what's actually happening on the ground. And I know that we can provide the rigorous analytics that countries need in order to do smart industrial policy at both the domestic and the international level.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bentley. And I feel sorry for your PhD process. I feel sorry for the minister's upcoming PhD process, but most of all, I feel sorry for Mzwanele, who's in my team, and will have to supervise the minister, because I don't know how he's going to get away with that. Turning now to Dr. Dianna Barrowclough. Dianna is from UNCTAD and has been doing some excellent work around financing and the financing of just transitions and green transformations. You know, it would be really interesting, I think, for the audience here, Dianna, to get a sense of, you know, in UNCTAD's view, what is the role of multilateral organizations like UNCTAD in facilitating North-South, but also South-South cooperation in industrial policy, and especially the financing thereof?
Thank you very much, Kamal. It's wonderful to be here. When Kamal said he was going to be very strict with us on the time, what he didn't say is, by the way, I'm throwing out completely the order of program that you were told about in advance, and we are doing something more spontaneous. So thank you so much for that. So the role of UNCTAD, well, of course, as you all know, the role of the UN and all the multilateral organizations is in quite a tumultuous time. We see it as a time of transition, and we're looking for, you know, the best path forward that we can, but it's not straightforward. As you know, our budgets are also cut severely, and we're also struggling to do our job of providing the service that is needed for our member states. So the role of UNCTAD, in fact, we are entering our conference next week, where our member states will tell us what they want of us, and we will have a discussion about the state of the global economy and the most important and relevant contributions UNCTAD can make. So this is, I would say, this is a moment of debate. But let's also remember that UNCTAD was formed in 1964 at the, I would say, the insistence of developing countries for a voice in global policy making, with the recognition already in 1964 that the world economy was forming in ways that were making it very difficult for developing countries, to integrate on an equal footing and on a mutually beneficial footing. So the need of UNCTAD was already evident in 1964, and the other UN institutions, I should say. I don't speak only for ourselves. In the sense of what we do looking forward, bringing this into this, this very specific and, I think, concrete question of industrial policy, what we heard from the minister very eloquently and compelling, it's no longer a question about should a country do industrial policy or not. That argument has, I think, been pretty decisively made. The question now is how to do it. And the expectations of the success of industrial policy, that's a very big ask that you have mentioned. We're talking about structural transformation of the economy into higher productivity activities, into activities that are low carbon in their use and efficient in their resource use, also shifting away from high carbon activities and doing this in a way which provides decent jobs for large numbers of people with an equitable society. I mean, this is a huge ask for industrial policy. It's the biggest investment push that we've ever seen. So that leads me to the question of the finance. And to get to your point, Kamal, about what do the international institutions have to do to help this? We're looking at the biggest investment push ever. It has to be at a global level because there is a lot that countries can do individually and regionally, but actually it needs to be global as well for the scale of finance and the interconnectedness of it. And now UNCTAD, and indeed your own work in the G20 principles, it's a recognition that we have major flaws in the international financial architecture that really need to be redressed before we can scale up finance at affordable cost and into the places that it's needed. So there's a very dangerous narrative that goes around that really, we only need a small proportion of total global financial assets. Global financial assets are worth, I think, more than 470 trillion is the last count from OECD. And what we need for industrialization and climate-aligned development is a peanut of that, 1% of that. So it should be straightforward to get this and allocate it into these very productive activities that will earn revenues and create jobs. But it's not straightforward. And we've seen over a decade of this strong narrative that these funds will be harnessed. In fact, it's not working. And so we need this heavy lifting by the public banks and the public financial institutions. And these are global public banks, but also regional and national. So I would say this is another thing that we need to do here, is to really take seriously the role of our public banks. These are government tools. They are owned by governments. They are led and directed by public policymakers, and yet they are often not given the tools that they need to do their job. So this is one of the principles, I think, that South Africa and other G20 countries have really highlighted this. How do we get more finance into our public banks, given the massive expectations of their role? Which, one of the issues that the minister mentioned earlier is the illicit financial flows. Well, these are costing governments financial resources that could be put into their banks. The public bank can then scale this up by lending on international markets, but you need to have the core capitalization. And this is being lost because not only illicit financial flows, you said $80 billion, actually that's an UNCTAD figure, but there's also legal financial flows. So we need a global tax governance that does not have this base shifting, or that does not have these very unequal and ultimately destructive outflows of finance. Net capital from developing countries is negative. More money is coming out than is going in, even with all the ODA and the investment. And the financial and tax regime has a lot to contribute to this. I'm aware that I don't want to overrun my time, but thank you so much for starters.
Thank you so much, Dianna. Indeed, it is in a context of the complete collapse of ODA. I mean, if we look at the most recent IDA replenishment, it's clearly not meeting the needs outlined by the G20 in the triple agenda either. And this is a big gap. So we'll come back to some questions on the financing element of it as well. And I see some colleagues here from the IMF who can maybe have some inputs on that as well during our Q&A session. Just turning to Giuseppe. Giuseppe, we've worked quite closely on these green industrial policy principles in the G20. And UNIDO has been kind of integral to developing these principles in the G20. But, within the G20, there isn't an industrial policy working group. And all likelihood is that next year, during the US presidency, there'll be a huge cutting of many, many working groups. So, what is the prospects of continuing this work and taking forward this year's effort by the South African presidency on developing these green industrial policy principles? What is the potential of taking that forward, and how can UNIDO help to develop and support the implementation of these principles?
Thank you, Kamal, and thanks for inviting me for this to this wonderful building and this great event and a very timely discussion. I am not going to repeat what my colleagues have said. I want to put some of the maybe give some nuances to some of the things that were briefly mentioned, because I think that it's important to answer your question on what can be done right now, and also what was raised earlier. So we talked about the fact that now industrial policy is established as a concept and as a tool or a set of tools that everybody's using. But let us go through a little bit the evolution of this thinking within the G20 context, right? I want to highlight three major moments. They are not the only ones, but three major moments I've been following G20 for the past 10 years, right? And let me highlight the discussion on industrialization started with some weight under the Chinese presidency in 2016 on the development working group. There was an initiative that was also mentioned in the background note to this event on supporting industrialization in Africa and LDCs. And that was, and here I'm going to give my comment, as knowledge partners, we're not members of the G20, but we do contribute. We try to influence the agenda to reflect the United Nations principles and the status quo in terms of knowledge on best practices. That was treated as, okay, industrialization is on the agenda of developing countries. Yeah, let us have words of support to developing countries in their efforts to, it's no surprise. UNIDO is a specialized agency of the United Nations on industrial development. It's nothing new that developing countries want to industrialize, right? In Indonesia in 2000, and that kind of, the initiative was approved as voluntary in China, and that's it. And not much more happened. We actually had an evaluation afterwards, and we saw that not much more was happening in the G20 context. There was then Indonesia in 2022 tried to expand the scope of the trade and investment working group to include also industry. They were particularly interested in the digitalization of things, something that we didn't touch upon enough here, but it is extremely relevant to what industrial policies have to deal with these days. And in that particular context, trade and investment delegates were, this is no-go. Industrial policies are by definition, and we know it's not true, but that was the thinking. By definition, they are trade distorting. We're not going to go there, and that kind of was dead there. And then, of course, this year in South Africa, not only introduced in the Task Force 1 the topic of industrialization and these principles on green industrial policies at the forefront in a targeted way, but also mainstreamed industrialization across different working groups, and my colleagues from the development working group know very well how annoying I have been in raising my flag and say, hey, why don't we talk about the production side of the story as well? But for example, the Energy Transition Working Group had something on industrialization. Last week, there was a Trade and Investment Ministerial meeting, and again, there was a discussion, not an agreement, but a discussion on sustainable industrialization, on trade and investment principles for green industrialization. So this is a little bit, the thinking has evolved from this is a developing countries issue to something that has become, okay, this is about our energy security. The COVID crisis was clear for that, right? It was a production crisis, very clearly. We could not find items in the stores, right? So, and from that moment on, resilience, the minister talked about that earlier, economic security. These are the topics that right now drive some of the industrial policy discussions from governments. On the other hand, we have the need to drive production transformation, right? We are dealing with the pace and the scale of the transformation required to meet our climate goals and to keep pace with the technological advance these days is massive. We cannot just rely on the market will adjust immediately. We need to drive innovation, and there's an important role that industrial policies, that the public sector, as was mentioned earlier, can do in this sense. In this context, G20 is struggling to find consensus over these things because, as I said, there is a convergence around the need of industrial policies. Industrial policies themselves have evolved for the past decades as well. Now it's a much more comprehensive discussion. It was touched upon before, not only a vertical sectoral discussion, and rightly so. So in this context, of course, you have UN forums like UNIDO, like UNCTAD. There is a great amount of work that is done to advance knowledge on best practices around these policies. And then there are some specific initiatives, as was mentioned earlier, that can be advanced on a voluntary basis while striving for consensus, right? And there is a need for countries also to, you know, after so many years of Washington consensus, governments have lost their policy-making capacity in the industrial policy sphere. Lost is a big word, of course, but you know, there is a need for building capacities, institutional capacities, and knowledge capacities within countries. There is a need to, also in industrialized countries, there is a need to compare notes. We are making this up as we go. Again, the technology is moving very, very fast, and the employment effect of industrialization is not the same that it used to be, right? With the automation and digitalization, etc. So all of these are things that need to be taken into account. So there is a huge need for international cooperation on these topics, which of course the G20 can help sensitize, but then of course we have a UN system. We do have coalitions of volunteers around the world that can advance these things, and maybe we can touch upon in the next intervention. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you so much. I think there's a question that is coming up here, at least for me, which is, you know, once we enter into the space of, you know, countries all engaging in providing and shaping the incentives for, you know, technological upgrading, diversification, and the growth of their industries, where does that leave very small countries that don't have the basis, that don't have the monetary autonomy, that don't have the fiscal space to provide the large incentives, that don't have the markets? What becomes of those smaller countries in a system that is not rule-based, that we are currently kind of living in? And where do those smaller countries turn, right? And I think that this is, you know, this is really what the imperative of a rule-based system is. But I think I think, you know, it's going to take a while until we get there, right? It's going to take many years, and those countries, you know, might suffer greatly in the meantime. So I just want to bring it back to Dianna very quickly to, you know, ask, you know, what does this mean in relation to North-South kind of relations in industrial policy and the financing thereof? But what does that also mean for regional integration? And does this kind of accelerate the necessity of regional integration, especially for smaller countries?
Thank you. I can agree with you completely that to have a proper, equitable, global rules-based system is the best. I mean, that's what we want. At the same time, and especially in a time of reconfiguration and turbulence as we have now, there are huge benefits that can be gained by regional integration. Even when the global system is working perfectly, regional integration still offers a great deal, including for the smaller countries that you've mentioned, but I would say for all the countries actually in the region, all the members. I mean, think about, for example, think about what's happened with the New Development Bank. You know, this is a BRICS bank, started off with 5 members, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. This is already a major source of climate finance. It's contributing a lot already in this. This is an institution with 100% ownership by the South. In the World Bank and in the global forums, developing countries have less than 40% ownership. And I think you saw a difference in the way that these banks could respond during COVID, for example. The Southern-led banks could respond very quickly to their members' needs because they know their members very well, and they have close relations at the ministerial level, at all levels. So there are benefits in terms of pooling finance. You know, you have voice and you have speed and rapidity of scaling up finance. There's also benefits in terms of markets. I mean, thinking of South Africa in an African context, you know, this is a fast-growing region, young population, economic growth. When the North is actually looking, extremely slow growth, some countries close to zero, there are many benefits, I would have thought, of changing this narrative that your regional neighbors in the South are not low-income countries. They are full of young people and many potential markets. So how do we make that happen, see it in a more dynamic and economic light? Sharing knowledge and capacity. We were talking about the fact that many countries lack policy-making capacity. This can also be something that is gained through regional procurement. Think of, for example, medical procurement policies in Latin America, where many countries working together were able to beef up production and consumption and interregional trade in products that they weren't doing beforehand. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dianna. I'm going to maybe open up the floor for a few questions, and then we'll hand over to the panel to answer the questions and to just give their closing remarks for the last 10 minutes. In South Africa, we have a tendency of using this time to make to say this is more of a comment than a question. Not only South Africa. Yeah. I'm going to ask that we don't do that. Let's refrain from that, and please keep your questions as quick as possible. We'll take 1, 2, and 3 on this side, 4, and I think that's okay for now. Please. Sorry, Sarah, just switch on the mic.
Sarah Anderson, Institute for Policy Studies here in Washington, D.C. One of my goals in engaging with the G20 this year, but more so next year, is to use it as an opportunity to educate ordinary Americans about how their welfare is linked to the welfare of people in other countries. And so I'd love to hear sort of your best pitch on why people in the U.S. and elsewhere in the global South should support sustainable industrial policy in the global South.
Great question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Henrik Harbo from Norway. We are fortunate to be guest country under South Africa's presidency, and I'm Norway's Sherpa in the process. So I think this is a very interesting discussion, and we support very much the work of Task Force 1. But of course, would like to see that this is not only a one-year discussion, that it continues in some way. So I just wanted to pick up something you said in the first intervention Bentley, on sort of the win-win aspects of this. And how can we convince the US to take part of this agenda forward? We have heard over the last couple of days that they will focus a lot on growth. So what we're talking about is crucial for growth. Quite positive on the debt agenda, because they want to push China on more transparency. AI, energy. So a lot of the issues that you touch upon directly or indirectly are part of their agenda. So how can we make this last more than this year and convince well, we cannot convince them, but so that it's their interest to take part of this forward. Thank you.
Hi all, my name is Ben. I wanted to ask a question. Folks have talked about regional integration, and I'm really curious if anyone could speak to sort of the state of trade invoicing in local currencies as a way to sort of do this regional cooperation, build fiscal space, which has sort of been a word we've been speaking about a lot. So curious about the state of play of local currency trade invoicing for building this space.
Excellent, thank you. And then there was a question at the back as well. And then we'll take Dr. Yufeng Lee's question last.
Thank you. Julian Piquet, via Africa Report, Jeune Afrique. I have a similar question, but maybe you can dive a little bit deeper into, you mentioned that the Trump administration is expected to, kill a lot of the panels, et cetera. So what are the most, if you were to reach out to the administration, the US, what are the key things that you want them to keep moving forward? That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Yufeng Lee from the South Center. Can I ask a question to the Honorable Minister? May I?
You may, but I'm not. I'll have to protect her in case she.
I think it will be good for her thesis. I'm sure of it.
Okay, it's a workshop on your PhD, Minister. You can't say no at this point. And your supervisor is sitting right there, so he's watching.
Okay, it's going to be a general question. I know the African Free Trade Area has grand ambition relating to green industrialization, and individual countries have also established, draw up strategies and policies in this area. I would like to hear from you, Minister. What do you think are the current progresses in reaching forward and achieving green industrialization? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for those questions. We've got one question on why should the US and its people support industrial policy in the Global South. We're asking about how can the US take this agenda forward and what key asks for the US should be next year, and a question about trade invoicing, and then there's a question around green industrial policy for the minister and the progress thereof. And if we could just use this as well to make closing statements, that would be great. Mr. Bentley.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think Sarah's question is a really good one, and I do think we're not having an honest conversation with Americans about the way that they are situated in a broader global economy. The wholesale destruction of USAID as one of the first acts of the administration was a real shame because we didn't have an honest conversation at that time, and we still are not having an honest conversation about how USAID is actually in the US national interest and how the money that was being spent there and the work that was being done by those offices are actually integral to the kinds of things that the Trump administration at least publicly professes to want to do, right? So I think that we do have to have that conversation, and I think there's a very easy and direct way to do it, which is the way that we had this conversation during the Cold War, right? Which is that our security is tied to the security of other countries. Our ability to have the standing in the world that we have is tied to the success of other countries under U.S. leadership, not in opposition to or under the U.S. foot, let's say. Rather, one of the phrases that I've used in my scholarship is that, hegemony is leadership, but leaders need followers. And followers actually have to believe in the leader, right? And so that's what my advice to the United States would be, is to have a very realistic and hard-headed sense of what leadership actually is, and it requires followers and people who believe in the project that you're saying. I think it's unlikely for this argument to work. It's just a little too high-minded. So I think that the things that are actually more likely to work are to speak specifically about narrow sectoral issues. And the best case scenario, I think, for G20 cooperation under the US presidency would be on issues, say, on critical minerals, right? So the kinds of principles that were already articulated in previous G20 rounds around critical minerals, around African industrialization, where we were able to advance the conversation on industrial policy within specific sectoral or regional contexts. I think that's the best case scenario for the US presidency for continuing this work in a practical way. And then we use that as a launching platform for having a more robust discussion under the UK presidency in 2027. That's what my broader plan or strategy would look like, at least in broad outlines. And I think, say, on critical minerals, the challenge will be to convince the United States that value addition in the global south, rather than pure extraction in the global south, is absolutely essential to American interests, and that the diversification of processing is just as important as the diversification of anything else in the mining sector, right? I have a new brief out this week with the Carnegie Endowment. Jonas Goldman, my analyst, is here. He and I worked on this brief together, which basically just makes the mathematical case that the US cannot generate the minerals that it needs for its own goals from within the United States, right? And that fantasies about Greenland or about Ukraine or other countries are also not going to address that problem, and therefore investment in the global south and in mining and processing in the global south is an absolute necessity for America's geostrategic goals, right? And I think that's a conversation that they can't avoid and that they're willing to have. And so I would say pick practical, tractable areas like this where the math and the logic is on your side, and do your best, and try to articulate the principles that we would like to collectively advance in those local areas without reaching too far or too hard. That would be my pragmatic plan.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
So, on the American issue, of course, it's not my role to give my opinion on national politics. I can refer to you a little bit what was discussed last week in the Trade and Investment ministerial meeting of the G20. The U.S. narrative was, I think the delegation made an effort to explain the position, which sound to the outside world sound a bit harsh or a radical turn of events. And the narrative is about we want to make of the U.S. a production economy again, and not only a consumption economy, right? What that entails is, you know exactly, and the things on the things on the policies, on the trade policies, where we made mistakes in the past. We thought that by liberalizing, this is the narrative, by liberalizing markets and opening up our market, we would become better. But because of this policy mistake, I'm quoting here, and because of the practices of, in particular, one big country in the East, as you imagine, we have deindustrialized. And what we want is to reindustrialize, right? So I think that the narrative right now immediately is to get manufacturing jobs back in the US more than anything else. So I don't think that a narrative around, again, I'm speculating as an observer, but I do not think that a narrative around international, supporting someone else's industrialization will function with the American public, as far as, at least as far as this administration is about. But I do think that we play with what we have, right? So I do think that this reprioritization of industrial policy, with the different drivers that we have. This is not about changing the economy towards meeting climate goals. This is not about that for this administration. But an international dialogue on effective industrial policies to reindustrialize. It's something that is common to Europe, with Europe as well, right? Europe has the same issue. Of course, they have very different positions on sustainability, on development cooperation, but there is some common ground. There is certainly some common ground on innovation, right? And it was mentioned on, U.S. may have an interest in leading in innovation in certain areas, and of course having influence on developing countries so that they absorb American technology could be appealing in a way, right? As was mentioned earlier, in geopolitical, geostrategic ways. So I think what the rest of G20 countries can do is try to work with this, right? Try to work with this and see how supporting developing countries, supporting not only their technology absorption but also their innovation capabilities. I think that is key. Could work. Is something that probably next year will be attempted. And of course, then the other thing that can be done, I'm done here. Something else that can be done is to also use other forums other than the G20 to keep the conversation alive, right, during this year. And I think there is an appetite for that from several delegations to use the UN system, to use the OECD. The OECD Development Center, for example, we work very well on these topics. Keep the conversation alive, and then let's see how the following presidency can take this up. We can play with what we have.
Thank you. Dianna?
Thank you. Sarah, gosh, that's a big question. And as my colleague said, we would not dream to advise the US on its domestic policies. But, you've asked a kind of a bigger question, really, which is, how do we show the win-win that, wealthy countries do not benefit by keeping poor countries poor? That's the baseline. And then actually wealthy countries can benefit when poor countries get more wealthy. I would prefer also to talk about, some moral and ethical issues, but if we're just keeping it a very kind of basic, kind of slightly transactional issue, I think that case can still be made, that there are huge advantages for the North, the global North, if the global South is engaged in economic activity that creates jobs and gives them consumption power to buy those products. It's helpful in terms of avoiding repeats of the health crisis that is still in our memory. It's not beneficial to have millions and billions of people really underserved with the most basic health or other needs. And there's the climate argument. Of course, maybe you don't want to go with that. But I think one of the things that's also worth remembering is that economic activity in a global economy, it's not really between countries, actually. It's between firms and between corporations. And, one of the things that doesn't get discussed very much is that with the outshoring of American productive capacities to China and to other countries, what Americans got in the benefit was, cheap products. But the profits didn't come back. And that's part of this, global tax that I was talking about before. So the fiscal revenues to the government did not benefit in the way that they would have with a different tax configuration. And just to have more and more cheap products is not enough when people have also, as you say, deindustrialized. So I think maybe if it cost America less to also continue to fulfill its commitments in terms of ODA, if the fiscal revenues had been paid as they should have, maybe that argument would be different.
Excellent.
I sense Kamal is shutting me here.
Yeah, sorry. We support free and open debate at the IEJ, and it's not against that principle, but I think we need to close off. We're about 5 minutes over time. Just in the last bit, I'm going to give over to the Minister to offer some closing remarks and to respond to the question. Would you like to come up, or are you okay there?
I'm okay here. Thank you very much. I was not aware I'll be doing closing remarks. However, in terms of the question that was asked, one of the things that we are putting in place as the continent and the sub-region of SADC in particular is to deal with the issue of a regional strategy on critical minerals, most especially the critical minerals that are contributing to green energy. So we have decided that instead of just having a strategy as a country, we need to make it regionally based so that it can then now be able to also speak to beneficiation, value chain on the regional level as well, so that we can then now be able to deal with the issue of AFCTA based on what it was actually meant for. But we have also, of course, looked at how do we also strengthen regional banking systems so that we may then now be able to also deal, and I think one colleague did speak about the trade invoicing based on local currency. So there are discussions that are actually taking place as it relates to that. We've got banks such as the Afri-Exim banks that are actually running with this particular matter on the FCTA level. So the issue of financing then becomes quite important. But equally so, there has been also a talk on diversification of markets so that we then now know that, not that we are saying that we will not continue to support multilateralism that have always been in place. We still are negotiating and continuing to ensure that the trade partners that we have always had still becomes our strong partners. But the view of looking at diversification of markets, most especially on the green energy products, we are actually looking at that. And lastly, there is a talk as well where we are also talking about an integrated way of commercialization of carbon credits, because we are the least also emitters. So we are actually looking at such things so that we can then now benefit more on whatever programs that we are putting in place to speak to the issues that speaks to our commitments on different global multilateral levels. So that's more what we are actually working on. And I know that there is a lot of progress that have been made in terms of beneficiation, integration, but also the critical minerals. But we have drawn our own critical minerals ourselves. We are not going to base it on what is already been spoken about. We have said as a region, we will say this is our critical minerals according to us. Therefore, whoever can want to come and partner with us on technology as well as skill base, we are open to that. So that's what we are actually doing from our side.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And on that note, I think we'll close off the session for today. I want to give a huge thank you and a huge round of applause, please, for our panelists. And just to thank the Net Zero Lab from Johns Hopkins University, the South Center, and the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, for this partnership and for coordinating on this event today. I just want to thank you all and wish you a pleasant Friday afternoon. Thank you.